Hello and welcome back to another video. In this one, we'll be covering what has happened over the past 2 weeks across the Ukrainian-Russian front. We start out in the south, where we see that the Russians over the past few weeks have managed to advance here in the Robotyne direction, both to gain a foothold within the village of Robotyne, as well as advancing here to the east of the village to advance and attack Ukrainian fortifications east of the village. And finally, the full recapture of the Surovikin line, as well as a push northwards from those positions to gain full control over the trench right here, and then move further northwards to attack the next line of trenches north of Verbove. And with these developments, we see that the Russians are continuously pressuring the Ukrainian positions, but there's not a lot of progress. I switched up my recap style to now include multiple sections of frontline developments in the same area to combine them together. As such, the 6th and 14th of March advancements happened here to the northwest of Verbove. I've combined both of them, as well as the sources and the date where the change happened, and combined the military change or territorial change here to the northwest of the village into one instead of two separate ones. And I've done that across the front. Moving on here to the southeast of Avdiivka, on the 10th of March, there was this advancement here. It is likely just a probing attack where no significant force is taking place or no significant attack is taking place. Instead, the Russians are testing the Ukrainian fortifications and readiness in the area to see if there is potential for an offensive operation in the area. As for the northwest of Priotne, it is the same thing again with another probing attack where the Russians yet again are testing Ukrainian fortifications and defenses. Northeast of that, again Shevchenkove, there's the same probing attacks northwest of the village, testing out Ukrainian fortifications and readiness in the area. We finally move on to Novomikhailivka, where there has been separate advancements by the Russians, both to the south of the town, as well as in the central parts reaching the center of the town, and in the northern parts capturing this forest line and road into Novomikhailivka. If the Russians manage to secure further, they will be able to secure an additional supply route in and out of the town, which will allow them to strengthen their push through the center. As such, heavy fighting is taking place throughout the front line, and there is these numerous advancements, but nothing significant considering the size of the town. Moving on to the next section of the front line here by Pobieda, the Russians, after securing the village, are now advancing and expanding their zone of control to properly secure the village and advance further towards the fortifications west of Marinka and northwest of Pobieda to properly gain secure control over the area and prevent the Ukrainians from launching counterattacks in this section of the front line. The Ukrainians are constantly counterattacking in the direction of Pobieda, trying to recapture the village, as it is one located in the heights overseeing Marinka, and it is an important outpost for the Ukrainians to secure the defenses of Avdiivka. But we do not see any such success with the Ukrainian counterattacks, and this leads to successful Russian attacks towards Avdiivka here by the northeast of the village and towards the town itself from the Marinka direction. The Russians are attacking both in the southern and northern direction, where in the northern direction we're mainly seeing armored assaults, and in the southern direction there's a mix between armored assaults and infantry assaults. The Russians have managed to capture two lines of fortifications, as well as reach the central parts of the town. Moving slightly further north in the direction of Krasnohorivka, we have seen two Russian advances here, both on the 5th of March, where the Russians have gained a foothold in the southern parts of Krasnohorivka, which is an important fortified city west of Donetsk, and the Ukrainians in turn launched counterattacks all the way to the 13th of March, where they managed to recapture a lot of these positions, but the Russians do still have a slight foothold within the city. Moving further north in the direction of Nevelsky and Pervomaysky, the Russians have managed to capture the village of Nevelsky over the 11th and 12th of March, and with that they have control over the village and fortifications combined with it, and with that they have the location of the heights overseeing the Ukrainian fortifications in between that and Pervomaysky, and in Pervomaysky this large area has been captured by the Russians between the 4th of March to the 13th of March. And with these developments, we see that the Russians are moving closer to gaining full control over the central parts of the town, but are so far struggling to gain the final parts, with the developments being mainly brought on by the flanking maneuver here from the north, creating a panic in the Ukrainian defenses, which allowed the Russians to then advance into these central parts or eastern parts of the town. And now they're looking to close the gap between the two sides and launch attacks out of the town to prevent the Ukrainians from defending it and push them out. Moving further north, we see here to the west of Avdiivka, there's not been a lot of developments throughout these first 2 weeks of March. What we have seen is that the Russians constantly launch offensive operations, trying to capture the village of Berdishi and Tonenke, while the Ukrainians are constantly launching counterattacks to try and recapture these villages completely. The Ukrainians have launched multiple attacks, including Abrams tanks, which ended up losing them 4 to 5 Abrams tanks, and in the south, numerous other assaults, not including Abrams tanks, but other Soviet tanks that the Ukrainians still have left, including T-62s and T-72s and T-80s. This is also including tanks they've captured from the Russian army. And then we're also seeing attacks towards Avdiivka. The Ukrainians had success initially in Berdishi and Tonenke, managing to recapture some lost positions and push the Russians back. However, in Avdiivka, they only left the western parts of the village in a gray zone. Other than that, they had no foothold within the village. Following those developments, the Russians heavily bombarded these Ukrainian positions. This has created a small Bradley cemetery in the western parts of Berdishi and destroyed 4 Abrams tanks in the eastern parts. And then, since then, the Russians have launched counterattacks and have regained the initiative within the village, allowing them to gain control of it. And in the Tonenke direction, the Russians launched a flanking maneuver from Avdiivka, which was firmly under their control, allowing them to flank the Ukrainian positions in Tonenke after their own counterattack, and then regain all of these positions, as is seen with the recap map. Moving on to the Bakhmut direction, we see here that the main developments have taken place by Ivaniivske, where the Russians, over a numerous amount of days, from the 2nd to the 5th of March, allowed them to push the Ukrainians away from the central parts of the village and the main road going through the village, and then pushing them to the southern parts, where they've gained a foothold in the fortifications of the Ukrainians here to the south of the village. But since then, the attacks have stalled, leaving the village split in two in the central parts. And with this, the Russians are constantly pressuring the Ukrainian positions in the area and trying to improve the areas here to the north of Ivaniivske, both in the village of Avdiivka and in the forest patches next to it. With heavy Ukrainian fortifications all throughout this front line, it is difficult for the Russians to advance further, but they are still attempting it daily with a lot of fighting. But the Ukrainians also launched counterattacks and sent reinforcements to this section of the front line to allow them to regain some of these lost positions. But so far, none of the Ukrainian counterattacks have been successful either, leaving it in a stalemate since last week. We then move on further north towards the village of Avdiivka here in the Luhansk region, where the Russians have managed to make advancements in 3 different directions. They've managed to secure the forest lines here to the north of Avdiivka. In the central parts, they've managed to gain control over a height overlooking the village, and in the southern parts, they've managed to regain full control over the roads here by the industrial area. So with this, we see that the Russians' next step would be to storm the village itself. There have been reports of them doing so, but none have been successful so far, leaving the village firmly in Ukrainian hands. Moving further north here to the west of Kreminna, we see this small advancements towards Terny. This happened 2 days ago and is the sole advance by the Russians towards the Ukrainians in the months of March here to the west of Kreminna. The Russians have gotten close to the villages. This has intensified the Ukrainian counterattacks and has made it more difficult for the Russians to advance, but they've managed to make this advancement nonetheless, and the Ukrainians have so far not managed to recapture any of the territory they've lost over the past few weeks and months. Moving on to the final part, which is here by Sinkivka, the Russians started the month out with withdrawing from the village to reorganize before they stormed the eastern parts by the forest line, pushing their Ukrainians back and then regaining a foothold within the village. Since then, heavy fighting has taken place within the village and on the eastern parts, but no significant changes have taken place. The majority of the fighting here by the front line is centered around the Russians launching offensive and assault operations against the Ukrainian fortifications and defensive positions, while the Ukrainians are constantly sending additional reinforcements, committing their reserves to the front line, and launching counterattacks to prevent the Russians from advancing further and try to catch the Russians off guard. This has raised the stake of these Russian offensive operations, They are less likely to launch risky operations due to the constant Ukrainian counterattacks. As such, the fighting has slowed down considerably when it comes to territorial changes, but the intensity of the fighting has significantly increased. The only reason the Russians have a significant advantage right now is due to their firepower advantage and their air superiority, allowing them to constantly bombard Ukrainian positions, whether they are on the offensive or defensive. This allows them to gain a significant advantage. As for the northern parts here between Russia and Ukraine, in the Sumy and Kharkiv, Belgorod and Kursk regions, over the past few days there's been constant assaults by the Free Russia Legion trying to disrupt the Russian election and capture a foothold across the borderlands. But so far the Free Russia Legion has not been able to achieve anything. They've sent multiple assaults across and have lost numerous armored vehicles in multiple videos released by the Russian Ministry of Defense showing constant destruction of these vehicles and a lot of casualties, but the Free Russia Legion has so far not been able to provide any evidence for any sort of foothold or capture of a borderland village so far. There was one footage, and that was turned out to be fake, where the Free Russia Legion took a selfie within the Ukrainian side of the border and claimed it was on the Russian side, but it was geolocated to be on the Ukrainian side. Now that is the summary of the first half of the month of March. That's going to be all for this video. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.